well. Okay, we've got a few people still trickling in, but we'll get started. So just to introduce myself, my name's Jess from More Onion. I'm just going to switch on my camera so I can say hi properly. I should appear in just a second. Hi there. So I'm Jess from More Onion. I'll be joined this morning by my colleague Rebecca, who is going to be taking us through this webinar on recruiting new supporters. So I'll be looking after the facilitation, so the technology, any problems anybody's having, and dealing with questions. So if you haven't used GoToWebinar before, hopefully should all be quite straightforward for you. You're all in listen-only mode with no video. You can see and hear us. We can't see and hear you. So if you need to communicate with us, use the questions panel. And I and my colleague Lucy will be monitoring that to keep an eye on any problems that you might have, but also questions that you have for Rebecca that we can pose to her at some suitable sort of pause points in the session. We'll also be bringing in some interactive elements. So there'll be a couple of polls and a point where we'll ask you to go into a Google Doc and contribute some ideas of yours. These obviously are completely optional. You don't have to take part, but obviously it's really interesting both for us to see a bit more about you and your challenges and your situation, and also a chance for you to find out a bit more about each other and each other's work. So we should be here for about an hour this morning, and hopefully plenty of chance for you to share your questions as well as hear what Rebecca has to say this morning. So I will hand over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Jess. Good morning, everyone. So before we get started, we've got a question for you. So let's check all my tech is working okay. So yeah, Jess, do you want to chat through our interactive bit?
Okay, so we're going to start with a question for you to find out a bit more about what your challenges are. So apologies, because of the way that the GoToWebinar interface works, it's not easy for us to share a link with you. So we're going to ask you to type this into the address bar of your browser, and it will take you to a shared Google Doc that you can edit. And in there, we've got 3 questions for you. I can see people appearing already, hopefully. That's really good news. So please, for now, just look at question 1, which is, we wanted to ask you, what is your biggest challenge with supporter recruitment? And that could be your biggest challenge right now or your biggest challenge in general. But it's just really interesting for us to see kind of what are the challenges you're facing, what is difficult for you. So feel free to just pop your cursor in and start typing. Obviously, if you don't want to share, that's absolutely fine. If you just want to see what other people have to say. So we'll just take a few minutes for people to kind of share their thoughts here. Okay, a couple of people saying that they can't see the Google Doc. What you need to do is take the URL, which is displayed on screen. So that's bit.ly/your-supporters, capital Y, capital S. If you type that into the address bar of a browser, I think if you've got a 404, I think we've got people in there, so it's obviously working. So remember, the link is case sensitive, so you need uppercase Y, uppercase S, your supporters. Okay, so we've got issues coming in. So what are the biggest challenges? Getting their email address, recruiting support around a taboo or challenging topic, which makes storytelling hard and people are nervous to discuss. Finding compelling and impactful actions for supporters to take when our issues are challenging to solve. I think that's a very common problem for a lot of issues. You know, the solutions are a long way off. How do you motivate people to take action now about something that, you know, is not readily fixable? Recruitment, that's a really interesting one. Finding the right people for the roles we have available. Yeah, these skills are not necessarily readily available, or there may be people out there paying more for those skills. Recruiting on social media, getting funding for social media acquisition. Conversion to a second gift, so that's really interesting. So getting people, but getting the people to stay with you is the next challenge. Budget. Okay, hard to get full data on supporters, so maybe easy to get the initial opt-in, but harder to get the detailed information you need to really build a relationship. Keeping momentum up on our campaigns. Identifying an audience, that's really important. Yeah, working out who you want to talk to rather than blasting everybody. Having things for them to do. Yeah, so for a lot of campaigns, having ongoing supporter engagement can be a challenge. There's some really great stuff in here. Okay, feel free to continue to add to that, but we'll move on, and that's really useful background for Rebecca as we get started. So Rebecca is one of our digital strategists at More Onion. She works on this stuff with clients big and small and has lots of experience to share. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Jess. And yeah, please do keep adding thoughts to that doc as we go through. The good news is hopefully I've got some tips and advice for some of those challenges for you today. But before I get started, I just wanted to give a really quick introduction to More Onion for some of those who may not know who we are. I can see a few familiar names and faces in the webinar panel, but a few of you might not have met us before. So if you haven't, then More Onion, we're a digital mobilisation agency that works exclusively with progressive charities and not-for-profits, and we specialise in supporting organisations to deliver high-impact communications campaigns and fundraising. And we do this in three ways, through providing strategy consultancy, creative design, and developing technology and software. So we do everything from full service campaign delivery, and we also do parts of that depending on what support you need. So we could just do a little bit of consultancy on strategy, developing strategy with you. We could support you with creative design, or you could need some support with technology. And we also have our own campaigning and fundraising platform or toolkit called Campaignium, and that enables organisations to quickly and easily set up optimised campaign actions and donation forms. And here are just a few of the organisations we work with. So we work with lots of organisations in the UK, from the very small, just a couple of people, right through to some larger organisations. And we also work with lots of organisations across Europe as well. So some of these people use Campaignium, our toolkit, some we support with consultancy, and for some we support with both. Okay, so that's enough about us. Moving on to today's webinar topic. So today we're going to be focusing on recruiting new supporters online. So hopefully that's not a surprise for you guys, as we're a digital mobilisation agency. So primarily going to be focusing on how do you recruit supporters through getting their email address and their details that way, so that you can communicate with them via email, via online methods, and build a relationship that way. So whether this kind of lead generation has quickly become a priority for your organisation because of the pandemic, whether you maybe already have a recruitment strategy implemented that you're looking to improve, or whether you just have some time on your hands right now with other activities paused and some space to think about your recruitment strategy, whatever the scenario you have right now, I hope you'll come away with some useful advice. So these are the 5 areas I'm going to be covering: strategy, journeys, tactics, channels, and evaluation. I'm going to frame the advice in as broad a context as I can. So hopefully whether you do campaigning or fundraising or both, or you just do communications and raising awareness on your issue, whatever it is, hopefully the advice will be useful. I've got a lot to cram in today, so I'm going to move through well, hopefully not too quickly, but there's a lot to pack in, but don't worry, I'll be taking questions at the end, and you'll, as Jess has already said, you'll be getting a recording and the slides afterwards, so don't worry if you miss anything. Okay, so let's start off with strategy. So it can be really tempting when you're thinking about recruiting new supporters to jump straight into ideas for how to recruit them, but it's really important to take a step back to consider why you want to recruit them in the first place, why you're looking to recruit new supporters, and why you need to. So take the time to think about why you're looking to recruit and to really consider your objectives. I often tend to find talking to organisations that their recruitment needs are often driven by really immediate, more short-term priorities. So things like the objective is, well, we need 5,000 signatures on this petition. We need to raise £10,000 for this appeal. Or, you know, we need to meet a board target for our supporter base being this size. And that's fine, and it makes sense that we're often driven by these short-term priorities, particularly in the context right now. But it's really important to try to develop a recruitment strategy that aims to look beyond these short-term objectives and considers what kind of supporter base you are trying to develop in the longer term. And the reason for that is because supporter recruitment often requires a lot of investment, whether that's staff time or budget. So it's really important to make sure that you're actually going to get some long-term results from all of that energy, effort, and potentially money you're investing. So yeah, aim to strategize beyond the short term. So one way to think about developing your strategy is to work back from the impact you want to see. So what kind of longer term impact are you trying to have? Do you want your supporters to contribute to? So usually when you're thinking about that, you want to dig into your organisational strategy. So work back and look at that. Look at your longer term objectives and look at things more holistically. From here, you can actually think about what support you're going to need to achieve those objectives and this impact. So do you actually need really big petitions? What's your theory of change? Do you actually need more grassroots support? Do you need more donors, or do you need higher average gift from a smaller number of donors, for example? So once you've thought about what actual kind of support you need to achieve these longer term goals, you can move on to focusing on who. So who is where we tend to start. It's well, we need 10,000 people, rather than thinking, oh, well, actually, what are we trying to achieve and who do we need to achieve that, and working our way back. So once you've worked your way through that, you can look at defining success metrics for each of these. So as I say, we tend to jump to the who and putting quantitative numbers on that. But actually thinking about what support you need and how you're going to measure that can be a better place to start with developing your strategy. And obviously, if you've got these objectives, then you need to know how you've been successful in developing the right kind of supporter base you need to achieve your impact. So we tend to be quite good at focusing on those short-term objectives, you know, number of people that have taken an action, opt-in rate, email open rates, etc. But actually, it's good to think about longer-term metrics for measuring support in the medium to longer term. So here are just a few examples, but obviously you'll want to develop one that's right for your strategy and what you're trying to achieve. So it could be actually, let's look at the type of campaign actions that supporters are taking. So for example, is it that maybe you want all MPs in the country to have been visited by your supporter in the past year? That's going to help you achieve your longer term objectives. Is it that you want to look at an engagement rate? So you actually want to be looking at building deeper support with the people you're recruiting. So you want to look at 60% of supporters having taken 3 or more actions for you. A donor conversion rate is often quite a common one, so how many people have been converted to donating to you, and an average donation amount could be another one that you look at as well. Okay, so now you know what kind of support you need and why you're recruiting your supporters. You can move on to actually focusing on who your target audience is, who you want to be recruiting. So yeah, who do you need to recruit? And now you can start thinking about what the best way is to do this. Now you can move on to looking at tactics. It's really important to try and define your target audiences both quantitatively and qualitatively. So that's usually the bit that gets overlooked. We just go straight to the numbers because they're easy or easier. But it's really important that you take a bit of time to focus on your target audience's needs. Now, this can be tricky if you maybe don't have a huge amount of budget, you haven't done much audience research. Don't worry if that's the case. Just work on developing a hypothesis instead that you can test. But still, it's really important to build up a picture of who is this audience and what do they need to be persuaded in order to be recruited and to join you and your organisation and support you, and what needs need to be met so that they can go on to to support you in the ways that you'd like them to. Okay, so thinking about that, and before moving on to talking about recruitment tactics, I want to mention supporter journeys. So a lot of the time, you're not likely to recruit supporters who straight away support you in all of the fantastic, deep ways that you want them to, or high value ways that you want them to. Particularly if you do have quite big long-term objectives, e.g. you want them to become regular givers, you'd like them to volunteer, maybe campaign in their community, or even meet their local MP. Even just getting them to share things can be quite a big ask for people who are just getting to know you. So it's really important that you focus on building a relationship with these supporters in order to win their support. And the best way to do that is through a really well-designed supporter welcome journey. So what do I mean by a supporter journey? So a supporter journey is a planned, coherent series of communications. It's often email, but it can be any channel. For this presentation, I'm just going to talk about supporter journeys as being email supporter journeys. So yeah, it's a coherent series of communications that you send to your supporters. And they can have lots of different objectives. Obviously, the aim, if you're doing a welcome supporter journey, is to build a relationship so that you build support. And it's really, really vital that you have these in place as part of your recruitment plans, particularly if you are looking for that higher value support, such as a regular gift or visiting, maybe you want a supporter to visit their MP. And think of it like a new friendship. So you're unlikely to give, if a new friend asks to borrow £100, you're really unlikely to do that. You need to get to know them, you need to trust them, and you need to understand why they need that money if you're going to do that. It's the same with new supporters. So you need to build that relationship before you go in with those bigger support asks. So at More Onion, we design them. Well, we colour code them based on the content, and this is something we recommend that organisations do too. And this is to make sure you're getting the right balance of asks. So campaigning asks, we colour code as pink, donations or fundraising asks as red, and then we have engagement in yellow and loyalty in blue. So loyalty is the kind of content that is thanking a supporter, it's giving examples of the impact they're having, it's things like films and case studies, things that show the supporter why their support is so important. Engagement is an action that you ask the supporter to do that isn't passive. It's not a campaign, it's not focused primarily on campaigning or donating. It's just asking, it's a way that a supporter can engage with you and your organisation in a way where you're not asking them to do something. So we think it's really important that you have a balance of these asks in your journeys, and that you have engagement and loyalty content so that the journey has a balance of give and take. Again, think of it like a friendship, where if your friend is constantly asking you for things, can I borrow £10? Would you mind doing this for me? Can I have that? It gets really exhausting after a while. So that's why it's important that you have a journey that balances that give and take so that you can build that relationship. Here's a brief case study just to illustrate what I mean by this. So Freedom from Torture are an organisation that help survivors of torture to recover and rebuild their lives in the UK. And we work with them on recruiting new supporters and developing a welcome journey for them. And the objective of that welcome journey was to convert them into, to try and get them to become regular givers. The audience analysis showed that these new supporters just don't tend to know much about torture, so where it happens and that it can happen to anyone. So our hypothesis for the journey was that if we can build understanding through meaningful engagement actions, so not campaigning or donation asks, that this will increase the likelihood that they will donate in the future, because by taking these engagement actions, learning more about the organisation and what it does, that builds a relationship, meaning that they're more likely to want to give to them in the future. So here's a sort of simplified diagram of the journey we developed. So this welcome journey lasted for about 3 to 4 months. I'm not going to go through it in a great amount of detail because I don't have time, but I'm really happy to talk to anyone afterwards who might be interested in this case study. But what I want to point out here is that you can see the real balance of yellows and blues, engagement and loyalty content, balanced out with the campaigning and donation asks in there. So we designed it with lots of engagement actions included, and here are a couple of examples. So one was asking supporters to send a message of hope to survivors of torture. And another was a quiz based on recipes. So survivors of torture often have cooking therapy classes that Freedom from Torture provide, and they shared recipes, and you had to guess what country that recipe was originally from. Now, the hypothesis was that if people took these engagement actions, through the journey, they were more likely to become a donor, and that's what the results showed. So people that took a campaign or engagement action were 4 times more likely to become a regular donor and 4 to 5 times more likely to make a single donation. So there's a case study example that shows the importance of journeys and that they can really work as part of your recruitment strategy and to help you achieve your objectives. Okay, so we've got some quick polls in this webinar today, and so the first one is I want to ask you guys if you have a welcome journey in place for new supporters. So I'm going to hand over to Jess, who is managing polls today.
Okay, hi. I've just turned off my video as my Wi-Fi was struggling a little bit with the additional burden, so I'll be talking over the dark. So just going to launch the poll now. So the question is, do you have a welcome journey in place? So yes, no, we're working on it. So hopefully you should be able to see the poll now. We'll give you a few minutes to answer.
Just realised I can't see the poll. That's not very helpful.
You've got to wait for the answers. I can see it.
I see.
So 58%, 60% voted.
So I can see now.
Okay, sorry if anyone's having problems with interacting with the poll. It's obviously working for most people, but don't worry if you can't take part. Hopefully you'll still enjoy the outputs. Last couple of moments to take part. I'll close that and we'll be able to see the results. Okay, share results. Okay, so really interesting balance here. So relatively, so about 1/5 have no welcome journey in place at all. So that's the good news is that there's lots you can do to improve your supporters' experiences, and then a fairly even split between those that already have something in place and those who are kind of on the way. So there'll be a chance, obviously, later on for us to dig a bit deeper into this. So yeah. I'll hide that.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Hand back
really
to
see. So if you're working on it, or you're one of the 20% that haven't got one yet, then you might be interested in a free report that you can download from our website with some tips on how to develop great supporter journeys. And if you're interested in developing more engagement actions for your journeys, your welcome journeys potentially, then we did, my colleague Claire, another strategist at More Onion, did a digital engagement actions webinar a couple of weeks ago that you can find on our website, and you can catch up with that there. So really recommend you watch that if you're interested in how to develop more engagement actions. Okay, so moving on to tactics. So what is the best way to recruit new supporters? So when deciding on recruitment tactics you're going to use, it can be really tempting to just copy what everyone else is doing. You know, that worked for this, seems to work for this organisation, let's just do that. But it's actually really important to weigh up your options and decide what's going to work best for you and your strategy. I've put tactics in plural because it's likely that you're probably going to need to test quite a variety of different tactics and actions to work out what's going to be best for you. There doesn't ever tend to be a sort of silver bullet and sort of one thing that definitely is going to work. You need to test a variety of things. So what I'm going to do is look at some of the most common types of recruitment actions and their potential strengths and challenges, and so things that you might want to weigh up before considering whether they're right for you and your strategy. So first up, a subscribe or sign up or hand raiser action. So the strengths of these is they're always on, they're not particularly time bound. You can always have a sign up ask on your website. And they're really easy for a supporter to do. They don't even have to consider an opt-in box because they're subscribing to him or from your organisation. You know, not too much data to put in. The challenges with them though is that it can be really hard to make them compelling, you know, because they're not time bound. It's not a particularly urgent ask, so they can have quite low conversion rates, and they tend to be less shareable. It's not really something you tend to want to share with your friends and family, which is, do you want to subscribe to this organisation's newsletter? And then there's donating or fundraising actions. So the strengths with these is you can get really high traffic, lots of people visiting these actions if it's really urgent, if you've got an urgent appeal. And another strength is obviously the cost of recruitment is offset instantly if people are donating as their first action when they join you. And the challenges is they can often have quite a low opt-in rate, and if it's not particularly urgent, then they tend to get quite low traffic as well, low volume of people. And they're quite a high bar ask. So for someone's first action to support you, donating is quite a big thing to ask them to do. So that can be a challenge too, if you're looking to recruit people that maybe don't know a huge amount about your organisation. Moving on to campaigning actions. So things like petitions or emailing your MP, anything with a target. So these can be really compelling if they're timely and they're well framed. They can have a really high conversion rate as well because of this, and they tend to be quite shareable too. But the challenges are that they're often quite time bound, so you don't tend to have campaign actions running for long amounts of time. And also, so not everyone campaigns. That mean that both in the sense that not all audiences might want to take a campaign action. They might not feel comfortable emailing their MP, for example, or signing a particular petition. And also, if you're an organisation that doesn't do campaigning, then these actions might not be available to you. And then finally, engagement actions. So I just talked about that in the supporter journey section. So these are things that aren't primarily focused on campaigning or fundraising, but there are other ways that a supporter can engage with you. So it could be things like quizzes or surveys or polls, or sending a message to a beneficiary of your organisation, for example. The strengths with these is they can reach new audiences, so potentially those that maybe aren't comfortable with campaigning, for example. They can be really shareable if they're optimised. This has to be done well. There's not always a guarantee that engagement actions will be really shareable, but it is a potential strength. The challenges are they can be really difficult to execute well if the objective is recruitment rather than just building a relationship with current supporters. And they often can have quite low opt-in rates because people just want to take the quiz to find out what tree they are or what bird they are, but they're not actually interested in signing up at the end of it. So one thing to keep in mind is that every recruitment tactic or action you consider is going to have its challenges, but these don't mean that you shouldn't choose them or you shouldn't go ahead and use them, even if those challenges are quite hard to mitigate. It just means you need to adjust your expectations and the expected results. It may just be, for example, if you're using a donate ask to recruit new supporters, it might just take time because the volume of those is quite low. But that's okay. You know, it might also mean that there's a higher cost, for example, with an engagement action. But if it's meeting your objective and it's recruiting the right supporters, then that's okay. Just have a think and sense check. So I'm going to go through a few examples of how you might make your action stronger. So how you might mitigate some of those challenges we've just looked at, just for a few ideas for you to think about. And so first up is an example from Safe Child Thailand. So what if the challenge is that your organisation doesn't do campaigning, or you don't often campaign, so you don't have a petition that you can use as a recruitment action. So Safe Child Thailand is a really small organisation we work with, and they work to protect children in Thailand from exploitation. And they wanted to recruit new supporters, ultimately to convert them into donors later down the line. So we worked with them to design their first Facebook ads they'd ever done, with just a sign-up ask. But what we did is we framed it in sort of stronger campaign language. So you can see here, rather than just saying subscribe to get our latest news via emails, we framed it in much stronger terms. So sign up to stop child exploitation, you know, sign up to help keep children safe. Now you obviously want to strike a careful balance here. because you don't want to mislead people. But take the time to think about why your target audience might want to sign up to receive emails from you. You know, latest news is a bit vague, so try and couch it maybe in stronger terms, be more specific, and tailor your call to action to the audience and why they might want to hear from you. Obviously, you need to make sure that your supporter journey meets those expectations as well. Otherwise, you'll have people unsubscribing if it's not what they expected to receive. So these ads performed really well. They had a cost per lead of less than £1 each. Another way to make your action stronger, particularly if you're not campaigning and you have a subscribe or a sign up ask, is to include a value exchange. So the supporter gets something in return. So I've got two examples here, both aiming to recruit new donors. So one's from Liberty, where you can sign up to get a free copy of their Human Rights Act guide. And then another from Battersea, which is offering a free tote bag. This actually asks supporters for a phone number when they sign up, and then they get called to ask for their address. And at that point, they're asked to make a donation. You obviously want to be careful and use really good targeting for these, because you obviously have a cost to offset if you're offering some kind of value exchange. So you want to keep that in mind if you're choosing this kind of tactic. And then finally, another example is what if you want to reach, you've got a campaign action, but you want to reach new audiences. So there are people you know that you think would support this campaign, but maybe they're like, no, I don't usually sign petitions, or they're not particularly engaged in that topic, but you think you could convert them, you could persuade them. So this is something that a challenge that Friends of the Earth had. So they wanted to engage new audiences with their campaigns, and so they decided to do this using quizzes. So this is an example of a quiz where you have to spot the hidden plastics in everyday products, sorry. And once you completed this quiz, you get asked to sign a petition to the government asking them to legislate to stop plastic pollution. So this is a quiz that they built using Campaignion, our Campaignion fundraising platform. And it was really successful, this tactic. So it recruited over 50,000 new supporters, primarily by promoting the quiz using Facebook adverts. And the average cost per supporter was between 80p to £1.10. Just to dig into this a bit deeper, so Friends of the Earth really invested time in coming up with an engagement action, testing an engagement action that was going to work for their audience. So they took time to do creative idea generation for a range of quiz topics on things they campaign on. And then they took a minimum viable product approach to developing their quiz and which topics were going to work. So a minimal viable product approach is when you create actions really quickly and simply using the lowest cost and energy and effort possible, and then test them so you can work out which one works best with your audience. So Friends of the Earth actually tested 4 different types. They just created simple quizzes on Typeform and then put a little bit of money behind some Facebook adverts. And you can see the results here. So they quickly got an idea of which topics were going to work best for them with their target audiences, which topics were most interesting, and crucially, which ones meant that people would sign a petition afterwards. Because there's no point if you get thousands of people engaging with your quiz, but not many people actually take the action afterwards. So Friends of the Earth are now closely monitoring these new supporters they've recruited to see how engaged they are with other campaigns they run. Okay, another quick poll. So this is on what's been your most successful digital recruitment tactic in the past year. So we'll define successful as what's brought in the biggest volume of supporters and the most supporters for you. Jess, over to you.
Okay, so I'm just about to launch the poll now. Now, quickly to bear in mind that GoToWebinar only allows us 5 different options. So you'll notice that one very important option here, donation asks, is not included. So if your most successful digital recruitment tactic was financial appeal, then answer something else. Because obviously, you know, if you've had an incredibly high-profile emergency appeal, that could well be your biggest source of new signups. But as Rebecca has highlighted, it's relatively unusual. And obviously we'd include within sign up and subscribe those kinds of hand raisers, slightly more campaigny phrased ones that that Rebecca highlighted. So by campaign actions, obviously we mean petitions, something with a target, an email to target action. Okay, we've got 50% voted. We'll give you a few more seconds to take part if you want to. This is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not scientific, but it's
no, but it's really interesting result. Okay, we've got about
interesting.
60% responses. I'll just give you a couple more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll now and share the results. Okay, so a very substantial win for campaign actions there as the most successful digital recruitment tactic in terms of numbers, followed by something else, and there'll be a chance for us to dig a little bit deeper into that later on when we go back into our Google Doc. But yes, very low performance for engagement actions there, which is really interesting. So I'll hide that and hand back to Rebecca.
Very interesting. It doesn't surprise me that engagement actions is quite low. Some of the best performing engagement actions I've seen recently are actually those that piggyback on top of a campaign action. So the way you're recruiting is still through a campaign action, but it's just putting something in front in the user journey to engage people and bring them in and to get them interested in joining your campaign. But yeah, a whopping 70% for campaign actions, which is really interesting to see. Okay, so we're now going to move on to channels. So you've decided on your recruitment actions that you're going to use and your tactics. Where are you going to get your potential supporters? Where are you going to promote these actions to reach your target audiences and recruit your new supporters? So again, as with recruitment actions, it can be really tempting just to jump straight in and use channels that you've seen other organisations using successfully, or ones that seem to be most popular. But again, just take a step back and have a real think about who you're trying to recruit and whether those channels, are the ones that they use, and think really carefully about your audience. So yeah, where are your potential supporters? So when you're thinking about channels, go back to your audience. Where are they? What channels are they using? Where are they getting their news and entertainment? How do they interact online? Where are they shopping? Where do they spend the most time online? And what are their needs? In what space are they most likely to interact with you and take your recruitment action? So for example, it can be tempting to jump straight to Facebook adverts, but if you are looking to recruit, if you want new supporters who are people in their early 20s, probably not the best place to be investing your money or your time, as we know that Facebook use is declining amongst people who are in that demographic. Again, as with recruitment actions, it's really important to not just put all your eggs in one basket and invest in just one channel. You want to test multiple channels. You're going to have to test things. Not everything will be successful. And just because one channel worked really well in the past for you for one particular thing, it doesn't necessarily mean it will work well in the future. So keep going back, keep testing things, seeing what works for you. So a few tips if you haven't got much budget, which I'm sure was one of the challenges that was shared at the beginning of the session. So just because you haven't got any budget doesn't mean you can't do supporter recruitment. So one thing to do is to map out your organic touch points. So touch points you already have that you own, channels that you own yourself, and to really optimize those for recruitment. So for example, which pages on your website get visited the most? Could you put a pop-up or a link to a campaign action or a subscribe ask there if it's appropriate for that person's on-page journey? How often do you ask your social media followers to sign up? Do you have an action? Do you have that pinned to the top of your Twitter page, for example, or on Facebook? What different asks could you test? Different ways of framing a sign-up ask to your current social media followers. Do you have a standard that at events, I mean, obviously offline events aren't happening at the moment, but hopefully they will do in the future. Do you have standard practice at your events where you've got a tablet or an iPad or a sign-up sheet where you're capturing if people want to subscribe to join you? Have you thought about putting something in your email signatures, on your blogs, all sorts of options, but it can be really good to just think about a cohesive strategy for that, and if you're maximising all of those touch points. Maximising the reach of your existing supporters is a really great way to recruit new supporters. Time and again, organisations and clients that I work with report that some of the most engaged supporters they have are those that have been recruited through their existing supporters sharing campaign actions or other actions. I recently did some research for Shelter on movement building, and I interviewed 7 organisations and found that the leading source of supporter growth in the past couple of years for most of them was supporters sharing their campaign actions via email and social media. So really think about how you can optimise your campaign actions for sharing. Are you testing different things? Is there a way you could be maximising that further? And finally, if you're having trouble getting budget, then maybe see if you can just invest a small amount in some channels just to test to prove that investment is worthwhile. So Facebook adverts is probably the easiest way, and you can use a couple of £100 just to test to see if you can get some results that prove that a bigger amount of money could be really worthwhile and could achieve some results. And then another question often get asked is, how can I improve my cost per lead, so the amount it's costing to recruit each new supporter? It's one of the big metrics that we look at in any recruitment strategy. So the first thing to do is, if you're not getting a very good cost per new supporter, then the first thing I'd recommend to do is just to go back and check your strategy. So have you got the best action targeted at the right audience? It could just be that you've got a mismatch there and it's just not working and you need to test and try something else. So go back and sense check that first. If you think, no, this should be working, this, we've thought this through, the research is here, there's another reason, then check your metrics. So look at things like the conversion rate on your page, your opt-in conversion rate. Actually, is your form and your opt-in optimized? So, for example, for campaign actions, our research is saying that a yes/no radio box is the best way to get the maximized opt-in rate. If you'd like some tips on this, there are a couple of free reports on our website for optimizing web forms and email opt-ins for higher conversion and opt-in rates. Okay, a quick run through Facebook, as I know that that's quite a common way that people are recruiting, channel that people are using to recruit new supporters. So here are 5 tips for Facebook adverts. Before I share them, I just really want to caveat that these are not necessarily silver bullets that are going to guarantee to work. There are no set rules with Facebook. Facebook, as you know, if you use it relatively often, it constantly changes how it does things. So yeah, take this advice with a pinch of salt. Think really carefully about what your Facebook ad strategy is. Test things. There are no guarantees, basically, is what I want to say. First step is to really test loads of different combinations of copy and images and content, and keep testing. That is how you're going to get the best results for your adverts. The second is to let Facebook's algorithm do the hard work for you. So Facebook has a very, very, very sophisticated algorithm behind it. It's got a lot of information about all of us, and it's constantly learning and improving. That is quite terrifying, but it's also really, really useful. And you can harness that in lots of different ways with your advert options. With the advert options it offers you. So spend some time getting familiar with these and testing them out. If you're aiming for volume with your recruitment, then it has a campaign budget optimization feature that you can turn on for your ad campaigns. So this basically means that it tests for you which adverts are going to get you the lowest cost per lead. And so it means you don't have to do the testing. You can just set up a bunch of different adverts and let Facebook work out which is working best with your target audiences. So it saves you a bit of energy and effort. Another common error that I see is people not separating out target audiences. So you build an audience and you say, I'd like to find people that support Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and another environmental charity, and bundle them all in together. The problem with doing that is if those ads perform really well, you don't know which of those audiences the advert has performed best with. So I really recommend separating out target audiences so that you can work out, especially if you're just getting started, which audience is responding best. Later down the line, once you've got a bit more info, you can start bundling different targeting together. But if you're just starting out, separate things out so you can test and see which is working best, which audience is best for you. Test lookalike audiences. So again, you need to check your data, your privacy policy, talk to your data protection officer and or a lawyer if you want to do this, but you can upload your existing supporter data into Facebook, so you can exclude them from seeing ads, because you don't need to recruit them. But you can also use it to create a lookalike audience. So Facebook looks at those who those people are, and it creates an audience that is like them. It can be a really, really cost-effective way of recruiting new supporters if your data policy, privacy policy allows it. And finally, use a conversion objective. So you can set objectives for Facebook ad campaigns, use a conversion objective, and use the Facebook pixel. So you can put a piece of code on your page, so Facebook knows that if someone takes that action on your page, that they can count it as a conversion. Much more accurate way of setting up your ads and making sure that you're spending money that actually helps you reach your goal. Okay, a really quick case study, because I'm conscious of time, but on Facebook ads. So Fidra are a small environmental charity based in Scotland, and we worked with them this year on a campaign. We worked with them to launch a campaign asking supermarkets to take forever chemicals, which are also known as PFAS chemicals, from their food packaging. This was launched as a new film came out called Dark Waters. I'll let you Google and look it up, but that was back when we could go to the cinema. So they want to launch it because this film was getting a lot of press and interest, and then just launched a campaign to go alongside this. They wanted to recruit new supporters through their petition and reach new audiences, because they only have a very small supporter base. So we ran Facebook ads for them. Here's a few examples of them and a few examples of the copy and content that we tested. So we tested 6 different copy variations with 5 different images, so a lot of different variations of ads. Target audience was women in the UK, 30 to 65 plus, and we decided to target those interested in Greenpeace. The rationale there was that we thought those interested in Greenpeace are likely to be interested in issues about pollution and environmental protection, and they're likely to take action on it too, because generally if you tend to support Greenpeace, you probably are likely to have supported one of their campaigns. And the objective was conversion, and we used a Facebook pixel. Petition was built using Campaignian. So we just put £50 a day as an initial test behind that whole campaign, all of those adverts, and we used Facebook's budget optimization and lowest cost settings. So we said, please optimize this campaign, these ads, to find the people that are likely to take it for the lowest cost. And it was really successful. So over 7,000 signatures on the petition so far through these ads. It's on pause at the moment because of the pandemic. And had a 64% opt-in rate with a cost per supporter of 22p each. I haven't got a huge amount of time, so if anyone would like to talk about that in more detail, I'm really happy to have a conversation afterwards about how we set that up. Okay, finally, moving on to evaluation. You need to be looking at what's working for you, and you need to be measuring your success accurately to get the most out of your recruitment strategy. Strategy is an iterative process. You always want to be looking to improve it. A few tips: track everything. So track links to your friend, for example, Google UTM codes. You want to know where people are coming from with your recruitment actions and what channel is working best for you. Have a supporter source field in your database. I say that like it's a really easy thing to do, but it is. The best thing to do is to have somewhere which shows exactly how that person arrived in your database and where you recruited them from, and have that monitored and tracked somewhere. And then finally, keep a really close eye on your opt-in conversion and unsubscribe rates. So if one channel is really, really successful and getting a really low cost per supporter, but the unsubscribe rate is really, really high, then actually that's not a very good channel for you, even if the cost is low. And then finally, remember that success doesn't necessarily mean a really, really cheap cost per lead. Success is if you have recruited supporters who actually help you achieve impact. So be really careful of how you're evaluating your success. It's important to remember that if you're going after harder to reach audiences, then that might actually be more expensive, and cheaper is not always better. And then again, just to go back to those long-term metrics that I shared at the start, have a think beyond your short term of your cost per lead, your open rates, your conversion rates. think about what in the next 6 months you want to be looking at when you've recruited these new supporters to evaluate whether your strategy has been successful. Okay, and our final poll. So this is on evaluation. How well are you measuring and evaluating your supporter recruitment success? I'll hand over to Jess.
Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll now. So this is asking about what you're already doing. How do you measure and evaluate your supporter recruitment success? So have you got the full testing program with the tracking and crucially, a process for acting on those results? That's obviously the gold standard of something that's working. You looking at results, but maybe not systematically. You're looking at results, but maybe not acting upon them. Looking at results just now and again, or actually not at all. I'll give you a few minutes to respond to that. Okay, got nearly half people responded. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and share those results. So interestingly, so the biggest group is that tracking and evaluation is happening, but maybe not systematically. So that gap between doing the work, but having a system to make sure that it's fully embedded into your processes. But I mean, it's really encouraging that nearly a fifth do have an ongoing testing program and a process for putting those learnings and results into practice. But obviously, a full third down at the bottom who are not, either not doing this, not acting upon it, or only doing it very sporadically. So
that's the end of the presentation. We've got a little bit of time for questions. Jess, do we want to ask people to answer the questions in the doc, or shall we? I don't know how many questions we've got.
Just for a little bit short of time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we could jump straight to the questions that people have posed in the Q&A panel, a couple of follow-ups. And then maybe for those who are able to hang on for another 5 or 10 minutes, we've got that Google Doc. Would be quite interesting to go back and get a little bit more from you on about your work. So picking up the questions, there's one kind of point of clarification from Caroline about the Safe Child Thailand case study, which was asking about the response mechanism. So for those Facebook ads, was it a link to a landing page on a website? How did people respond to that?
Yeah, really good question. So we actually tested 2 different types of response mechanism for that. So one was sending people to Safe Child Thailand's subscribe page on their website, just their newsletter sign up page. And another was using what's known as the Facebook lead generation tool, which is a bit confusing, but it's called that, but it's actually a form in Facebook where people can sign up. And actually we found that for them, using the form in Facebook performed best. Because their subscription page wasn't particularly well optimized. It's something that they've gone and worked on since. So yeah, for them using the form in Facebook worked best, and then they imported that data into MailChimp and started their welcome journey with those people. So yeah, that's how it worked.
Rebecca, do you want to pop your video back on? It'd be quite nice to see you as you're replying.
I didn't realise it had
cool.
turned off.
Oh, no, hang on, you've gone again. There we go, we got you back. Cool, a question from Ruth. What is a good cost per lead? I think you've partially answered that one already.
That's a good question. A good cost per lead is one that recruits the right supporter for you. But it really depends on what you're doing. So if you're trying to recruit people through maybe an email your MP ask, you're likely to see a higher cost per lead. Because that's quite a big ask to ask people to do. But if you're really looking to build a supporter base of people who want to engage with their MP, then that's worthwhile investing in. Generally, so say if you're running actions for petitions, then I'd say anything below £1, like around £1 for someone that takes the petition and opt-in is good, from what I've seen. But yeah, context is everything when talking about what the best cost per lead is, because it really depends on the action and the channel and the type of supporter that you're looking to recruit. But yeah, for sort of low bar campaign asks, I'd say, you know, aim for £1. Yeah, and really distinguish between like the cost per the action and the cost per the new supporter, because you've obviously got an opt-in rate there that's gonna change that.
Cool, which actually brings us on to the next question from Hannah, which was, could you clarify what you mean by conversion? Is that different to opt-in?
Yes, so conversion, it all depends on how you define it. So as long as you know in your organisation how you're defining it, but I would define conversion as somebody just taking the action, not necessarily opting in, but conversion as being they do the action on the page that you've asked them to do.
And then the follow-up also from Hannah, could you explain what you mean by a supporter source field?
Yeah, sorry, I kind of threw that in. Basically, it's just somewhere in your database where when you're looking at a supporter record, you can say, oh, okay, they came from this campaign that we ran. Like that was the first action we've got in the database of them taking. That's how they joined us, or this person subscribed via our website. So it's basically just somewhere that you track how that person entered your database and became a supporter for you. It's just a really good way, so when you're looking overall at your database, you can be like, okay, in the past 3 years, 40% of people have come via petitions we've run. And if you can drill that down into, okay, they came through someone, you know, friends sharing, or they came through a Facebook ad, even better. But it's just a really good thing to do when setting up a database, is to be capturing that information somewhere.
Yeah, and it's quite vital for that question about that longer term strategic view, isn't it? Because if your real measure of success is, are they still with you and taking action a year later, you really need to know whether the people who took the quiz are performing better or worse or the same.
Yeah,
as the
that's
people
exactly what
who came
are looking at now.
Yeah. Cool. And another question from Anna. Do you have any advice on opening rates or increasing open rates on emails?
Oh, good question. First off, check your bounce rates. So just check that your data quality is good. If you've got really high bounce rates, then it could just be that you actually need to do some data cleaning. So you've just got loads of email addresses that aren't live and working. And then I would just start doing some testing. And also think about how long have those people been on your list for? Is it possible that some people have just don't look at those emails anymore? And maybe think about doing a reactivation email where you actually just say, do you still want to hear from us? Because it could just be that you've got people on that list that just aren't going to engage ever, and that's bringing your open rate down. But other than that, you just need to test, and see what works for those people, and see what time works, what kind of open rates work. But yeah, start with your data quality first.
Cool. And another question about, there's a lot of questions on testing and tracking, which is really encouraging. So do you have any advice or any guide on tracking links, for example, UTM codes, from Caitlin?
So yeah, tracking links is just get into the habit of using them. Just create a Google sheet or a spreadsheet and put them in, and just be really, really consistent in how you use them, and just pop in there every time you create a track link, just put a little note in there of where you used it. I've lost count of the number of times I've created a track link and gone, oh yeah, I'll remember what that tag means in there and where I've used that, and then I come to evaluate at the end and I'm like, I cannot remember what I meant by that. So yeah, be really, really consistent and document everything.
Yes, definitely one to talk to your colleagues about and make sure you've come up with a consistent approach and a central place to store all that information, not least because obviously a lot of these things, the measurement takes time, and when staff move on, if things aren't thoroughly documented, you'll have done all this wonderful tracking and testing for nothing, because nobody will know what any of the data you've collected actually means, because that person's moved on and didn't leave the information behind them.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just checking the list. I think that's the end of the questions related to the presentation. We've still got about 35 people with us, so those of you who are still here, if you would like to jump back into that Google Doc we were using earlier, I don't know if you can throw the URL back up on screen, Rebecca. We would love to have your answers to questions 2 and 3. So what has been your most successful way of recruiting new supporters? So tell us a bit more about your success stories, some of those campaign actions that accounted for that 70% in our poll before. And also question 3, in relation to supporter recruitment, what would you like the chance to try and what is stopping you? So what are the barriers to your doing more? We could see a little bit of that in the challenges question with budget and corporate commitment, but we'd love to see a little bit more about kind of what's working for you and what would you like to do. So we'll give you a few minutes to populate that. So successful ways of recruiting new supporters, we've got asking them to share. So as Rebecca's already highlighted, this is kind of definitely a really powerful and high quality way of bringing in new supporters, because we all know that there's nothing more compelling than being asked to do something by somebody you actually know. And so the level of warmth and commitment that you're bringing people in on at that point is already very strong. So strong social media presence being a successful way of recruiting, highlighting don't currently have a supporter journey in place. So, and I think that's actually very common, organisations having a lot of success in recruiting new supporters but not having resourced the next steps of kind of nurturing those relationships. Offering an activism pack, so that's that value exchange that we highlighted earlier. Things people would like to try, more engagement actions. So main barrier before now is time.
Yeah, always the way with engagement actions.
So we use Facebook ads, but I'd love to see what other channels offer, such as TikTok and Instagram. Barriers, investing time in setting up tracking links and a proper supporter journey. So I think, yeah, all of this stuff is very time consuming and requires a lot of coordination with other people within your organisation. I think can often be quite challenging.
It does. I will say that once you've done it once, though, it does get easier. It's just embedding and getting your processes and everything set up. The first time is always the hardest and the biggest curve, but once you get into the habit of it, it does become a little less time consuming.
I think also what we see with a lot of our clients is that once it's been done once, there's a lot of buy-in across the organisation, because people can see how much more effective it is to build integrated supporter journeys that draw on fundraising and campaigning and that bring together different parts of the organisation.
People suddenly are like, oh, you know, become very interested and invested. And results as well. People like seeing it.
Cool. Well, thank you for everyone who's shared in those documents. I appreciate we've overrun a little bit, so thank you very much for your time, and thank you for bearing with us. We will share the video afterwards. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll just check the Q&A panel one last time in case there's anything else. So with that, thank you very much, Rebecca, for sharing your expertise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll keep the webinar open until everybody has left. So if there's anybody who wants to remain and just ask any specific questions about any of the case studies or hang on the line, we'll stay here, but that's the end of the webinar as such. So thank you very much for joining us.